Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Scott McFarland. We're 29 days away from the midterm election, and former President Trump is using his influence in some key swing states. He was in Nevada and Arizona over the weekend, campaigning for Senate and gubernatorial candidates there. Both states have those races, and the former president has the ability, potentially, to change the race, and those races have the ability to change the balance of power in the U.S. Congress and in governor's seats. Joining us now, Musadiq Bidar, Major Garrett, Robert Costa. Musadiq is a CBS News tech and politics reporter with us from California. Major is CBS News' chief Washington correspondent with us from the White House, and Bob is CBS News' chief election and campaign correspondent at the desk with me here. Let's begin with you, Bob. You just did an interview with Bernie Sanders, who is a forceful voice in his party and no doubt watching all the races we just described. What's he telling you about the midterms?
Senator Sanders had an op-ed article today published in The Guardian where he argues that abortion rights should be at the forefront of the Democrats' closing message in this midterm campaign season. But at the same time, he believes Democratic candidates nationwide need to also forcefully articulate a strong message on the economy and push back against Republican attacks on President Biden and the party with regards to inflation. It's an emphasis on the economy, on issues of class that Sanders has long talked about. But he does worry, he writes in this op-ed, that too much of the party's advertising campaign, broadly speaking, is just talking about abortion. Let's listen to part of what Senator Sanders had to say.
Well, look, I think the Democrats have a very good chance of regaining control over the Senate. We have an outside shot of winning the House. But I think if we are going to do well in this midterm election, we've got to rally the American people not only around the abortion issue, the right of women to control their own bodies, which is enormously important, Robert, but we have got to do more. We've got to reach out to working families today who are hurting. We got 60% of our people who are living paycheck to paycheck, while the wealthiest people in this country have never done better. You got workers today who can't afford health care, they can't afford prescription drugs, they can't afford rent, can't afford to send their kids to college, while CEOs now make 400 times more than their average employees. So I think what Democrats have got to do is to say, if we regain control over the Senate, if we regain control over the House, we are prepared to take on these very powerful special interests whose greed is really destroying the middle class of this country.
Abortion rights are front and center after what happened in Kansas this summer, after what happened at the Supreme Court. Why is abortion, in your view, not the only issue to close on for the Democratic Party?
Look, let me repeat, as somebody who has a 100% pro-choice voting record, I think the Supreme Court's decision was an outrage. Women have the right to control their own bodies, not state government, period. It has to be an important issue in this campaign, but it cannot be the only issue. Poll after poll shows what everybody understands to be true. Working people are hurting. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about inflation.
Scott, I've spent time with Senator Sanders in recent months on the campaign trail. He's worried about young people who are working in coffee shops across the country, manufacturing jobs, being galvanized to turn out in this midterm election. And across the country, in some of these tight races, there is a question of whether that Democratic core voter will show up, be energized in November.
Like they are in successful cycles for that party. When the young folks turn out, Democrats' fortunes do better. There obviously is a big race in Arizona, a couple big races in Arizona, but the gubernatorial race was on Face the Nation Sunday when Major Garrett had this unique opportunity, a unique accomplishment to get both candidates to finally talk back-to-back about the same issues. Before I ask you about that, Major, I want to play clips of the Republican Carrie Lake and the Democrat Katie Hobbs from the newsmaking interview yesterday on Face the Nation.
Opponents' positions on this issue are nothing but empty rhetoric. She's not offering real solutions. When she talked about invoking the constitutional authority of the state, she's talking about declaring an invasion at our southern border. That would do absolutely nothing to increase border security, but it would bring untold levels of chaos into our state. It's not a real solution. I have a border security plan that's been endorsed by 2 border sheriffs because they know that it's going to focus real solutions and bring meaningful relief and help them make their communities safer.
If you know the Constitution, you know that Article 4, Section 4 calls for the federal government to protect us from invasion. And under Joe Biden's lack of leadership, we just aren't seeing that. And we have an invasion at our border. The cartels, these narco-terrorist groups have operational control, and they're using Arizona to smuggle people, to traffic children, and to traffic the most dangerous drug we've ever seen, fentanyl. And so we're going to invoke our Article 1, Section 10, basically authority to take care of our own border.
Major, you asked them about immigration, about the border, about abortion, about election denialism. What were your biggest takeaways from what you got out of those candidates yesterday?
Look, we started in our conversation with both candidates on the question of immigration and border security because what the Republican nominee, Kari Lake, is talking about is creating a completely separate means of border control in Arizona and other like-minded states that has no real interaction with the federal government. It would work entirely separate from it, have their own police force, their own mechanism of detention, their own mechanism of arrest, and their own mechanism of trial, which would supersede, if they were to actually do this, asylum policy and everything else that the federal government is currently doing, or, from the point of view of Kari Lake, not doing on the border. And I asked her, I said, well, there would be lawsuits filed against this. For obvious reasons, would you adhere to whatever the lawsuits ultimately said? Or would you wait, and would you wait to see how they were sorted out? And she was sort of vague on that. So the idea that a state would operate completely separate from the federal government on what has historically and constitutionally always been defined as a federal prerogative and responsibility, border control, makes her a very different kind of candidate in this race. And that's why Katie Hobbs, her Democratic nominee and opponent, said she has a different approach. Now, voters in Arizona will sort that out. But in this context, someone like the Republican nominee, Kari Lake, being aggressive and bold and saying there's a huge problem gets more attention. And Katie Hobbs, finally, on her Twitter account, just on Saturday before appearing on Face the Nation, said that there's a failure in Arizona, and Arizona is suffering because of that federal government failure. I asked her who's failing. She didn't want to say the Biden administration, but quite obviously, the Biden administration isn't doing what she believes ought to be done. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said it's a failure. So it's a huge issue in Arizona. They're compare and contrast positions. We at least tried to elevate as best as we could for Arizona voters and the nation.
It was an excellent conversation, Major. Former President Trump has been in Arizona trying to get his muscle behind Kari Lake. He also was in Nevada trying to have his influence in that state's very competitive Senate race. Moose, you were there in Nevada. You've been chronicling that race. Give us a sense of what the former president did at the rally, accomplished at the rally, and the trajectory of that Senate race.
Yeah, hi, Scott. Well, President Trump was there campaigning for Republican nominee Adam Laxalt in the Senate race and the GOP gubernatorial nominee Joe Lombardo. But this Senate race, just like some of the other ones we've been talking so far about, is one of the closest in the country, and it's going to come down on this closing message around the economy. A lot of what we're seeing play out here is exactly what Senator Bernie Sanders was talking about in the interview we heard from just a short time ago. Democrats are really trying to focus on the economy here in this state. And one thing Senator Catherine Cortez Masto has been talking about in ads and on the campaign trail is reminding voters about the legislative success that the Biden administration has had in the last few months, from the Build Back Better Act to the Infrastructure Investments and Job Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which also allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices for seniors. That has been an important part of the closing message for Catherine Cortez Masto. But for Republican Adam Laxalt, his message around the economy has been, look, if you are happy with prices at the gas station, if you're happy with prices at the grocery store, then go ahead and vote for the party that's been in charge. But if you want something different, then that's been his message. And that could potentially be very successful in Nevada because this state was really hit hard by the COVID pandemic. The tourism industry and the hospitality industry was suffered severely during that time. And while the unemployment rate has since climbed back to a normal place, inflation is still really high in this state, among the highest in the country. And so Republicans really feel like they can message on that and put the blame on Cortez Masto and on Biden and Democrats and tell voters that you can come to us and we will offer you that alternative. So that's what we're seeing play out in Nevada, a lot similar to what we're seeing happen in Ohio and in Arizona and other battleground states.
Moose, Major, Bob, get your carbs. There's 29 days left in this marathon. You're keeping a good pace as it is right now. Thank you all.